Afternoon to all the distinguished participants. On behalf of FIEO, I welcome you all today's online session on Cbam, Omnibus, and begin preparing for the definite period. It's my pleasure to invite Mr. Sushil Kumar, Director FIO, to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, exporters leaders from different parts of the country. Our distinguished guest, Mr. Bhavesh Prajapati and Mr. Pranab Negi, both from SGS India Private Limited. Our valued colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome each one of you on behalf of FIO to this important session on Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, commonly known as Cbam. It's not new now because we have traveled a lot and almost at the final leg of this transitional phase and our definitive period. The implementation part that is with effect from 1st January 2026 is almost knocking our door. This introduction of CBAM by the European Union makes a significant shift in global trade and environmental governance. It's designed to ensure that the price of carbon emission is fairly reflected in the cost of imported goods, thereby preventing carbon leakage and promoting greener industrial practices around the world. For countries like ours, where industries are closely integrated with global market, understanding CBAM is not just important, but it is essential for future competitiveness also. Why I'm saying this, the reason is very obvious that our export sector has so many issues other than this CBAM or other non-tariff waivers, but the geopolitics and other political issues has made this a little more difficult for us, and therefore it is always better to understand each and every regulation which have been posed by European Union or by other countries. We need to address in such a way that it does not affect our export. As far as FIO is concerned, let me inform you that ever since it came into existence, FIO has always been on forefront, creating awareness, disseminating information, and providing handholding in all possible ways. We have had series of such awareness program both at head office and our regional office level also. In September 2025, we also approached directly to European Union and we gave certain suggestions through our Director General and CEO, Dr. Ajay Sahay, and we suggested that let us have some clarity on the data which has already been reported. So what are the feedback of European Union and what is their assessment whether whether they are going to check it or not, whether they are going to recognize the carbon pricing paid on third country, or whether they would like to give some assistance to MSME in complying it, because uh, we know that MSME will be the most sufferer. While saying this, I am not saying that our big brothers have no issue at all. In fact, they are also struggling to deal with CBAM. But as far as MSME is concerned, I think they have they need at least some support from some quarter. So we also approach government, and now especially we are looking for the response of European Union, whether they are going to accept this data or if they are going to verify it. So who will do it? Whether ETS module of the existing in the country itself, whether that will be recognized by them, or if not, then whether this requires any modification, etc., etc. The exemption threshold, as far as is concerned, that has been clarified already by European Union, and they have said that the 50 ton, but this 50 ton does not mean that 50 ton of export, but it means that 50 ton of import. So that means even if you are exporting 1 ton of goods to your importer in European Union, and that particular importer is importing more than 50 ton of that particular goods, you are not exempted anymore. That has been clarified. But There are, as I mentioned, there are number of issues which needs to be addressed and need to understand it properly so that we can, comply it and we can come out of this. For that, we have two distinguished guests here, as I mentioned. So let me extend a warm welcome to both our distinguished speakers who have graciously agreed to share their insights. Mr. Bhavesh Prajapati, Global Technical Director, and Mr. Pranav Negi, Manager, Carbon Services. So welcome, both of you, gentlemen. Your expertise will undoubtedly enrich today's dialogue and help us build a more informed and resilient approach to carbon-related policies and practices. To all our participants present here, thank you for taking the time to join us. Your engagement reflects the seriousness with which our industry and institutions are approaching substantially and climate action. Let us use this platform to learn, collaborate, and collectively strategize on how we can turn CBAM from a challenges into a opportunity for innovations, efficiency, and global leadership. With these words, I once again welcome you all and wish today's session a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. We will move to the technical session. Today, we are privileged to have experts from SGS India Private Limited, Mr. Bhavesh Prajadipati, Global Technical Director from SGS India Private Limited, Mr. Pranav Nagi, Manager, Carbon Service. May I now invite Mr. Bhavesh Prajadipati and Pranav Nagi to take over the session.
Pranav, I'll take it up.
Sorry.
Great. So first of all, thank you very much for this webinar. It's indeed needed, and the opening remarks is it's indeed the eye openers and quite motivating. Where the session ended with a statement where every challenge is can be converted into opportunity. So for me, I personally look at the challenge. The other side of the challenge is always an opportunity. So it's just turning around the challenge and you are into the opportunity zone. So again, thank you for having us here in this webinar. It will be our privilege to share whatever knowledge we have, as well as to show you the path forward in terms of CBAM requirements, which will be largely taken up by Pranav. Introducing me, though I have been already introduced, I worked with SGS as a global resource, work globally for various affiliates and countries in the capacity of technical director for climate change and sustainability solutions. Most of our responsibilities lie into the domain of climate change and sustainability, and CBAM is also one of them because it is linked to the net zero requirement of EU. That's where it started with. So EU has got its own net zero achievement requirements which they have to fulfill by 2050, and this has led to a lot of action plans from the EU. CBAM is one of them, and likewise there are many more where we are also working, to provide solutions to all our clients and all the organizations within EU as well as outside EU, like us, India, those who are having kind of interactions with the EU in terms of business. So yeah, I mean, we really look forward to this session, and we hope that all the participants will gain a lot of insights with respect to CBAM, its requirements, and we'll try to ease out your life and overcome the challenges that you may have. So with me, Pranav is also there. In case Pranav, you can introduce yourself, and then I'll take it, and then maybe you can take over again back.
Sure, Bhavesh. A very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having us here, and thank you for joining us. Uh, I'm Pranav Negi, and I'll just take care of the technical part, and we'll discuss more on those aspects in detail and try to support you with all the information that is currently present. Try to declutter specifically the noise that is around this regulation. That is why we've been fortunate to share those points with you in the support through the support of you. And yeah, thank you all for joining this session and we look forward to sharing all the information that we have with you.
Great. Thank you, Pranav. Can you go to next? So it's an opportunity for us to introduce SGS and then take you to the Cbam requirement. So SGS is we are very well known TIC industry, testing, inspection, and certification body working across the globe. And since we have got global presence, we at the same time carry a local expertise because we have our resources across the globe, all the locations that we have, and the resources are not less than approximately 100,000 in numbers, which are having their corresponding expertise into their field. And of course, we have a network of more than 2,500 offices, including laboratories across the world, which help us provide you testing services in-house in the entire value chain of our services. And then we are, as I said, globally spread across into 115 countries to provide almost all services that we have. So since we are into testing, inspection, and certification services, whenever you need, we are there for any kind of testing you require any kind of certification or an inspection, and this can be availed by any type of industry sector that exists in our organization, sorry, in our corporate worlds in India as well as abroad. So you can see the list of industry we can serve with our services of TIC, as well as we also provide services related to training, imparted training of various fronts, especially in terms of various standards, various auditing requirements, various certification schemes, and so on. Along with climate change sustainability training, CBAM is also one of the service where we provide a training to our clients in terms of making them understand the requirement, how they can implement CBAM systems in better way, how they can monitor the requirement as per the requirement of CM rules and regulations and so on, which can ease out their compliance mechanism, and which can ease out their day-to-day operations and monitoring activities. We do also have some consulting assignments that we can take up, taking care of impartiality and all those stuff. Of course, need not to mention that, but we are very strong on our integrity values. So we do provide consulting service for certain specific sectors. So if you can go next, Pranav. Impact now as it is rightly started, sir, rightly started with the challenges on the sustainability on the business. Sustainability is one of them. Like nowadays, sustainability is inbuilt, and it has to be inherently in your business processes, because it is no more a compliance, it is now a business need. So anything you do, you have to do it in a sustainable manner. Keeping that in mind, SGS has a portfolio of sustainability services which is divided into 4 pillars of our services, which is branded as Impact Now. So Impact Now is a portfolio of SGS services under sustainability domain, wherein we provide services related to climate change, which is called Impact Now on Climate. Likewise, we have on nature, which is Impact Now on Nature, Impact Now on Circularity, and ESG, which is most prevalent. Many of the companies are reporting ESG either under compliance of BRSR as per the SEBI, or even without compliance, a lot of companies are reporting their ESG. So we provide services under these 4 pillars, and we'll quickly take you through the pillar one by one. So if you can go next, Pranav. The first is Impact Now Climate. So under climate, we provide services which are meant to fight against the climate change related challenges and issues that organization face. That includes either legal requirements, customer requirements, regulatory, or any kind of climate change related requirement any organization has, which can include carbon footprint validation, verification, or preparation of the GHG report in terms of accounting reporting. And this could be at an corporate level, at an organization level, or it can be product related carbon footprint, or it can be facility level carbon footprint verification activity. We do have resources across the globe to provide this, which is done in various international standard like ISO 14064, GHG protocol, and one stuff like that. And when we talk about the product carbon footprint, we refer to ISO 14067, which are specific international standards being followed across the globe. We are also into CBAM. I'll not talk about CBAM because Pranav is going to have full-fledged session on CBAM next to this. And then we are also approved under various international registries like VERA, ICR. These are the program registries which manage various projects which are implemented to either, to basically generate carbon credits, which are either used for the offsetting of emissions or they are used for the removals. So the projects are called offset project or removal projects, and we are approved as validation verification body in many programs to validate and verify those projects which are meant for either offsetting or removing the GHG emissions in the world. We are also into ISO 14068 part 1, which is a carbon neutrality claim. So earlier there was a different standard. Since end of 2025, this original standard called PAS 2060, in case if someone has heard about, is obsoleted, and now there is an ISO track standard, which is ISO 14068 part 1, where we provide carbon neutrality verification service. Any organization can demonstrate their carbon neutrality by means of, at an organization level or at a product level, whichever is their choice and requirement, by means of reducing the emissions, avoiding the emissions, by means of increasing the, removal of the emissions, and whatever is residual they can offset. Like as I mentioned, there are projects which can generate carbon credit for offset, so they can offset their emissions by buying the credit from market, and every year they can claim that this year we have been carbon neutral by means of reduction, removing the enhancement, as well as, sorry, enhancing the removals as well as offsetting. So we provide those kind of services also, as well as we are also into SBTi target setting up services. We also support in the validation process of SBTi and then take you further for, generating your pathway to net zero and stuff like that. So that's all about climate change services. Quickly talking about nature, it's all about environmental due diligence services, impact assessments, site impact assessment, biodiversity, forestry supply, chain traceability, which is FSC service, and likewise. So those are also services which are under nature. We also provide circularity. This also adds to sustainability. The main products or main service portfolio and circularity are life cycle assessment, and EPD, environment product declarations, where anyone can print their emissions which are verified, a product specific. Like for example, I want to print on my packing material that for 1 kg of my produce product has X ton of carbon dioxide or a kg of carbon. This has been verified, got labeled. You can also get labeling also on your package subject to the EPDs. So these are all declarations we provide. We are also into ISCC certification, which is basically International Sustainable Carbon Certification, biodegradability, compostability, recyclability testing also. One of another service which is not mentioned because, is zero waste to landfill verification. So nowadays that is also quite popular. We are already in discussion with a few large organizations to verify the zero waste to landfill activities and their claim of zero waste to landfill for multiple sites. And if we are done with that, it would be nothing less than 300 sites in 2-3 contracts. So we are working on a large scale on those services also, which also goes into circularity. So that helps you to claim that you are avoiding landfilling, and instead the waste is used for some alternative methods of, disposal, which are more beneficial, useful, environmental friendly, avoiding GHG emission, stuff like that. So that's how it helps you to claim your ESG as well. And last but not the least is ESG assurance. So these are very clear cut ESG assignments across the globe, including India, where we have got BRSR requirement. We help organizations to develop their BRSR. We help organizations to verify their BRSR, and so on. We're also into some other audits like SMETA, BSCI, Hague Index. These are all, sector specific uh, uh, requirements of certification and verification in terms of sustainability. So this is the entire portfolio of SGS. As I said, under impact now climate, Cbam is one of the service because it is mainly dealing into GHG calculations, intensity calculations, as well as verification of GHG, and hence ultimately it meant for climate change mitigation of EU. So I mean, we bank on it, and we believe that it is definitely there is a way out for any challenges to overcome, and seeing the other side of challenge as an opportunity. So we look forward to see all the opportunities with you as one team, and always ready to support any organization to achieve their CBAM requirements at any stage of your business process. So from this, I think it's all about technical requirement that Pranav will uh, take care and take you through the all CBAM requirements. Over to you, Pranav, and thank you once again for having us here.
Thank you, Bhavish. Before we begin, I'll just outline how we've prepared this specific CBAM segment for you. So we'll touch upon what CBAM has been for those who are also new to the subject. Just to summarize where we currently stand, we'll then focus a bit on the omnibus simplification package that was passed by the regulation by the European Parliament. And then towards the end, we'll discuss a bit more on the definitive period, how you should as an organization be preparing, and specifically what things you should be looking out for. And we'll try to then towards the end, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session. So I would request anyone who has any questions to please park those questions towards the end or put it in the chat. And once when we reach that session, we'll just go through all of them together. So carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, old and yet so new regulation. It started back in almost 2019 when its inception regarding that there should be a regulation, there should be some regulation should be there, more about reaching net neutrality, net zero, all of those discussions occurred. And in October 2023, the transitional phase actually started. So the regulation actually started then. The regulation, what it does, it puts a price on the carbon emissions that are embedded in the goods that are specifically imported into EU. So if you're exporting to EU, whatever goods that were getting imported to EU, if they came under certain sectors, and even in the sectors, there were certain CN codes which represented the products. So if you had a product which had a CN code which comes under the CBAM regulation, then you would have to follow certain rules. You'll have to probably like communicate the carbon emissions of your product, basis on which then the long-term goal of the regulation is to have certain tax that the importer will be liable to pay. So it started with 6 sectors: iron, steel, aluminum, cement, fertilizers, hydrogen, and electricity. So if the goods were from these sectors under the same codes, then CBAM would be applicable. So the first thing we would always tell is first check whether your product is currently under CBAM regulation or not. Now, another major factor of an aspect of the CBAM regulation is its linkage to EU ETS. So EU ETS is a emission trading system that is there in Europe, in which organizations are, the targets are set, and organizations undergo at an organization level the GHG emission verification. They need to purchase credits if there is a certain limit, after which they do the emissions. So CBAM is closely linked. We've seen it. If you know a little bit about the CBAM, you should be aware that the cost aspect will all be linked to the CBAM. So ETS becomes a very major angle of the CBAM. Next is the CBAM goods, which we talked about, that the reporting is required. When you're reporting the embedded emissions. So it started for a small 6 sectors, a small group of products that were there under those 6 sectors. Now the overall plan would be to include more products and more sectors to that level wherein all the products getting imported would come under CBAM. So it's not just the products which remain under these 6 sectors that are highlighted, but also the other sectors. So it will be a gradual inclusion. But for those sectors and for those products, there will not be a concept called transitional period, which we are currently in, which is about to end. So they will jump into that, okay, they'll have a definitive period and they'll have to follow those obligations whenever that update comes in. So now, as we are discussing more about phase 1 and phase 2 is, if we can put it, we're in transitional phase and definitive phase, which is to start from January 2026. There is a shift, the shift of a lot of things. The first one being, for instance, organizations, the importers asking you for quarterly reports that they have to submit in the European Commission, so that of communicating that this is their overall imports and the embedded emissions associated with those imports. So that quarterly shifts to annual reporting. So no more of those quarterly 3 months reports that you and your team might be burdened with, but now it has, for definitive period, it'll start with the annual emissions report. So only one report is what you're sending, and what you are communicating is the base value of the product, of the embedded emissions that were there in your product based on annual production data. So you take, for instance, like 2026 data. Based on that, you have one embedded emission value that you will be communicating. That value is a representative of all the imports that happened in 2026 for your importer. Okay, so then the calculations regarding the cost, the CBAM cost, that will all happen at that level. So what you will be providing is the value, and that will be an annual value in the definitive period. Another major shift is, currently, because it was transitional, they wanted to provide a leeway to organization for them to at least understand, for the whole system to catch up with whatever changes were there. So verification was optional. So the only requirement from the importers end was that they should be submitting the reports, the quarterly reports, at least communicating. So no verification was there. Now there is, in definitive period, there is verification. So you have an annual report, you do the accounting and reporting. Second step would be to get the verification done of the report that you've carried out, and then you will share it with your importer, who will eventually share it with the European Commission, and thus it is how the flow of data will happen. Another major factor, which is because of which there is a lot of buzz around this topic, and especially during this time of the year, is financial obligations. So starting 2026, up until now, there was no financial obligation, there was no cost associated with those products that were getting imported. So organizations were reporting some value, they were trying their best to at least do the calculations with whatever report they would get, they would just share those values. Importers have to take those values, have to take those reports. No obligation, nothing, no financial cost associated. So they were also fine. Now there is verification also has come in, and then because there, why verification came in, because there was some financial obligation. So third party, there will be a value that we'll talk a little more about that as we go on, but there will be a financial cost that need to be paid in the definitive period. So earlier, I hope you, as an importer, as an exporter and a manufacturer, currently you are following such a process. As we go into verification, so we'll try to focus a little more on verification side and how you can be prepared. So the overall tone of the session would also include that aspect. And so in this here, us highlighting the process is also part of it. So once, because you've been reporting, you've been probably capturing the data points, you've identified your production process, you're now set at least with regards to what data do we really require. But often the case that is happening is the properly recorded or getting more. No specific methodology that organizations, a lot of them are when it comes to calculating. So first, whenever identifying your process, you've identified you're following a process, you need to also write it down. That document is a monitoring methodology document as per the CBAM regulation. So whenever the verification will come, which is in 2026 when it will start, the organizations should have a monitoring methodology document wherein you have all this information laid out. What is the approach, what aspects you are monitoring, how you are monitoring, all of that. And this document is the base of getting verified. So accounting, reporting, the CBAM template, Excel template that probably a lot of you have used, or at least seen one that was shared by European Commission, which we are using to communicate what our environmental impact is to the importers and then eventually to European Commission. There's another document called monitoring methodology document, because it is not being shared by to the importers, so a lot of organizations are not working on it. But this document is equally, if not more important than the accounting and reporting, because if you don't have this document, you have a set methodology, but it is just out in the open. A verifier cannot verify your emissions based on just the accounting and reporting document. So here, hopefully, after this session, you might look into it and start working on it. In terms of regulation, there are currently two regulations. This regulatory document, sorry, uh, the first one was establishing the Cbam that you should be aware of. That stays. That was in May 2023. The other is implementing regulation that came out in October. These two documents are the regulatory documents which you should ensure. So when it comes to accounting and reporting, I hope you are following this, but also in terms of monitoring and making your monitoring plan or monitoring methodology document, you're also relying on these two documents to check whatever is required is included in your own document. And then we have a guidance document, which is more elaborative with examples and definitions so that it's easy to understand. Again, this is a guidance, it is not a regulatory document. A regulatory document did come this year, which was the omnibus simplification. And this regulation added on the regulation which was there for in May 2023. So this omnibus package was a little buzz around the topic. What they wanted to do is, because there was a lot of they already planned to simplify this, not just the regulation but also the reporting. So omnibus was a bigger package. This also included other regulations, for instance something like CSRD or CSRDD, all of those also. But for us, for Cbam, it laid out certain points, and that is those points we will cover. And they had certain very important aspects which we should actually, which is creating a lot of confusion, and it's great for us to clarify. Now, starting with the simplification package, it is approved. Let's start with that. It's approved by the parliament. It came into force after it was published, 3 days after it was published, and this document is already published on the European Commission's Cbam website. So you can go there and check what the simplification was. We'll focus on the major points with respect to us and the broader scenario of what the Cbam looks like, because things are changing, so we should be aware of how it will impact us. So even though you might feel that you're, as a manufacturer, you're like something like a verification is not one of your concern maybe, or how the verifier is, whether which type of verification, or is it can there be any verifier, or is it accredited, unaccredited, those sort of things also might not look like directly impacting your Cbam journey, but it will surely will, and we'll try to elaborate a little more on that. So the amendment that was proposed, that has been passed, is the minimis exemption, which states that if the mass threshold of the import in a calendar year is less than 50 tons, which Sunil sir was also highlighting, then the importer does not come under the Cbam regulation, even if the goods that the importer was importing is currently under the Cbam regulation. So if it is less than 50 ton for the importer, then even then they do not come under this regulation. Why this was created? This was primarily to ease the burden on smaller manufacturers, importers there, and because of the administrative burden, the cost. This 50 tons was calculated with the foresight that we will keep almost 99% of the embedded emissions getting imported. So they are only leaving out 1%, and yet roughly around 1.5 to 2 lakhs of organization would benefit from this. So this is why they went ahead. They have a calculation for 50 tons, and they said, okay, let's keep the de minimis exemption at 50 tons. Second, as we said, the annual reporting. So initially we talked about that in definitive period you have to do annual reporting. Based on that, you'll do the verification and then you'll submit those reports. The annual declarations now can be done through the default values or verified actual values. A lot of your organizations might a little know about default value. These were the secondary values which were provided by the European Commission under Cbam. So those values were only valid for the transitional period. In the definitive period, there will be new values, new default values that will be provided by the European Commission. So either an importer can get the value, can share the value as default value to the European Commission for the imports, or collect that value from you, which will be the actual value, and then share it with the European Commission, basis on which there will be tax. So the importance of default value is very important, to know where does the default value lie, and then you should probably be able to understand where the value of actual value uh, really lies with respect to cost, also with respect to the requirement. Now, another major change which happened in this regulation was the submission date. So earlier, the organizations were expected, as a importer, they had to submit the Cbam report and uh, the tax that or the liability that they'll have from the imports by July, and then June, July, and then now it has been pushed to September. So last day of September is when the deadline has been pushed. So the organizations and the companies, the importers as well as the exporters, both will get some time to prepare for the report, get their verification done, at least for whenever the verification has to be submitted. That will be in the 30th September of the following year, day of the following year. Now here there is some confusion of the verification happening in 2026, but the actual submission of the verification is to be done in 2027 September. So what you do is you basis on the data, the production data and the exports of 2026, this report and the taxes will be submitted to European Commission in 2027 September. So now it might seem like, okay, we have another 2 years almost, right? But I can we'll see a lot of more points which this seems as a regulatory requirement, but you will have non-regulatory requirement, more sort of customer requests, which will probably force you to do the reporting earlier as well. So as per the regulation, this is the shift that is there. Next is another major changes in terms of downstream processes. So major emissions, for instance, taking the example of iron and steel, major emissions occur at the upstream level for organizations probably making slabs, ingots. So there is where it is occurring. And if their downstream processes result in a very small emission value, then this is being discussed that they don't have to add or calculate their emission value. What they will eventually be do is report basis on the upstream emissions that is there. Now here, what aspect of the upstream emissions they will have to report, in what manner they will have to report is not finalized, but because downstream emissions and the downstream processes specifically do not contribute very significantly, therefore this point has been included into the regulation of excluding certain embedded emissions from the downstream processes. The list of downstream processes is also not yet out. It is just that it will be excluded. Now, a little bit, because we mentioned de minimis, exemption, and why it is very important, because it has created a lot of confusion. Because this 50 metric tons value has been circulated, and the common error that a lot of organizations are making is that they are understanding that 50 tons of our export is what is associated. But we should not forget the CBAM regulation in general is only for importer. So whatever, why it is only for importer? Because the obligation to pay is for the importer. One second. Sir. Yeah, sorry. So the obligation to pay is for the importer. What we, because we are suppliers, so we need to provide that information to them. And if we do not do that, we lose out on a customer. That is primarily the only requirement and the only logic. And the reason why we would follow this regulation is because we have to address that market and the regulatory requirement that comes along with it. If we don't do it, that's fine. So the 50 tons, everything is as for the importer. So if an importer, we've taken an example just to highlight, if an importer, you are a supplier of good one, for instance, there's another organization who is a supplier of good two and good three, so on and so forth. And this company X is importing goods from these three suppliers. I'm really sorry. Yeah, sorry for that. So if the importer is, it has three suppliers. Now, in terms of, if we look through the eyes of the supplier, they might be under the impression, okay, we are only sending 25, 30, 15 tons to this. So the importer will not come under the Cbam regulation. We don't come under the Cbam regulation. But because the cumulatively for the calendar year, so all this, the minimum threshold is for calendar year. One importer who is importing in one calendar year more than 50 tons, metric tons of one CN code, irrespective of the number of suppliers, then the importer will have to follow Cbam regulation and will come under Cbam. And then the Cbam regulation is applicable on all the import, the complete value. It is not like 50, 65, for instance. So 65 tons is the total import and 50 tons is a deduction. There is no standard deduction. Even like in ITR, we have standard deductions. Here, no deduction. Whatever import, if it is exceeds 50 tons, then you have to pay the Cbam tax on the complete value. So this is what the exemption is. And this 50 tons might also change down the line. Currently, it is 50 metric ton and the obligation that is there. So for at least hope with you all, now it is clear that what 50 metric tons is, it is not for you. So either you can check with your importer whether they have less than 50 metric ton of import in a calendar year. If yes, then they are not, then you can check it that way. Else, it most likely will be more than 50 metric tons. A few more updates around this omnibus package and the legislation is goods. So two goods, one was excluded, one was included, one from Annex 1 and Annex 2 of the implementing regulation and the Cbam regulation. Electricity was added and non-calcined kaolinic clays were excluded. Now there's a set of default values, like we said. If there is some unreliable data, then average intensity of the 10 highest emission exporting countries for which reliable data exists will be considered in order to calculate the default value for countries with unreliable data. So hopefully India will have reliable data and we will have our own most likely default value that the European Commission will provide. It is not yet out. Then the next is where accreditation. So as I said, if we have two options going forward in definitive period as manufacturers, either the importer can directly report through default value or through actual values. If they are going with default value, they don't have to go with verification. There is no verification required if the importer chooses to go with default value. If they are to go with actual values that you as a manufacturer will provide to them, then there has to be a verification done. So you'll do the accounting reporting, you'll do the verification, you'll get the verification done, then you'll submit it, and then they'll submit it forward. So you can, this again will, you cannot just go to any person, any organizations to get it verified. There is a accreditation process through, under which certain organizations like SGS will be given a accreditation to carry out these verifications. Once this accreditation is obtained, organizations can do the verification or get them verified from those organizations. It is not an unaccredited verification. And mostly this accreditation will sit with the organizations that are there, that are with the national accreditation bodies present in Europe. Again, because it is for the importers, so those accreditation also regulatory perspective sits with the European national accreditation bodies. The guidelines for this verification and providing the accreditation to a certifying organization for like SGS is not yet out. Therefore, the verification also guidelines is what it means is not yet out. So sometimes there's a confusion which verification guidelines are not yet out. The organizations how to carry out the verification is there, and how to give the accreditation to those organizations. Those sort of information is not yet out, but it is expected first quarter of next year that these things will be out. Sorry. Moving on. Sorry for that. Okay, so more updates on how this legislation works. We are doing the accounting and reporting. We'll eventually do the verification as well. And as I said, monitoring is very important aspect. Yes, your organization doing accounting, please ensure that you are also focusing on monitoring a lot and have a monitoring methodology documentation in place. Now, if you have once you're done with the verification, you will have to keep the records, keep the data for at least 4 years until the verification, from the year that you get verified. So for instance, like 2027 you get your first verification, 4 more years. By 2031 December you should maintain those records as an organization. So this is why we should know, because then again this is slightly increasing the burden on your data storage also, how you are keeping the records, and over the period also. So it's not just about back data that you will have to monitor and keep a proper record of, because you have to do the calculations basis on that data. So for 2026, you'll collect all the data points. You'll ensure that you are following the MRV systems that are laid out by the Cbam regulations, keeping those data points ready. And then once you go to 2027, you are able to use the 2026 data to do the calculations to get it verified. In verification, those data and those data points will be validated, will get checked. So verifier will come in, check against, for instance, something like invoices, that okay, so much of raw material you consumed, or like electricity bills or production uh, volumes, to check what the internal data system, how you are capturing the data. All of this will have to be recorded. So it does put a little stress on data monitoring, but you will have to do it. And also you'll have to ensure that the records are safe for 4 years even after the verification, because maybe this is primarily done with the intention, if there is a chance of rechecking or there is a penalty, maybe then it will be required, because you'll just submit the verification, and if there is some error even after verification, then maybe there is some penalty, and for that they need to ensure that there are still records. Another aspect, though not for directly for us as an exporter, but surely indirectly for us, is the Cbam certificates. So I'll explain a little more on that in the subsequent slides, especially with regards to cost part, so that we should know what the cost implication might look like for us, and at least try to understand from the importer's mindset of what requirement or what request they might bring to you after this. So they earlier it was that the importer, whatever quantity they are importing in 2026, they had to purchase Cbam certificates for each quarter. So if for instance they are purchasing 100 tons of goods, and each ton of good is uh, 2 tons of carbon dioxide emissions, so roughly 200 tons of emissions they are importing. So in simple, let's say they had to buy 200 tons of, so 80% of that 200 tons they had to purchase Cbam certificates in 2026. So they should know what the emissions are. Only then they will be able to purchase 80% of the liability that they will have eventually. This has been shifted to February. So they cannot purchase Cbam certificates for the goods that they are importing in 2026 in 2026. They can only purchase it in 2027. That too starting from February. And then they will submit it by the end of September to the European Commission. So think from importer's mindset now that I have to import goods and I cannot, for instance, purchase Cbam certificate and adjust my cost liability in 2026. Simply, I'll have to find some other way to do so. So then knowing the liability becomes very important. Knowing the actual values becomes very important. So either they should know the default values or they should have the actual values. Either these two things. Currently, so we'll talk a little more on default and actual. Default values are expected to be regional and geographic, and they will most likely be on a very high level. Actual values are at least estimated to be on the lower side. So if there is a default value which is expected to be on the higher side, this default value is expected to come after the, again, first quarter of 2026 is what they are expecting, because they need to put it out now, because there's no more leeway for them also. So they have to give that, they have to follow it. Next is quarterly Cbam holding. So as I said, it was earlier 80%. In February, when they purchase, they will have to do it for 50%, and then for future also they will be probably keeping it 50%. And in order to estimate what is the impact, so you can see here declarant. So Cbam declarant or the importer, declarant could be a third party also, which is appointed by the importer. So if they can use default value to estimate the cost, as I said, the Cbam cost, or they could use the actual value that the organization might have provided in the previous year also for the next year. So for them, they would want to push to know that value. That's the whole point. See, default value, if it is high, how do they know it is high? They need some value to compare it against, right? And that comparison has to happen with your actual value, because you are their supplier. So if you, irrespective whether you go with actual or default, they would still want to know your actual value, so that at least they can make a call and say, okay, that this we'll invest. What is our liability? What is the benefit of using default value? It could be the cost benefit that actually comes from using the actual values, goes beyond the price. For instance, the accounting, reporting, verification, all these, and the internal resources cost that you are paying goes beyond that. And then lastly, it will be based on, one update was the cost aspect, as we said, legislative cost of EU ETS. It will be from 2026 what is the quarterly cost price. That's more for the importer side, but that's also a change that has happened. So all in all, these regulations, they changed, and it is continuously evolving. Now, a little more discussion we'll do is regarding the cost part. So there is a lot of formula. So one or two things we'll specifically highlight that you shouldn't worry about. And the intention is to show you that why it is important to know your emissions. And you'll see the upside as well as the downside of not knowing your actual emissions. So this is a formula which would be used to calculate the liability. Now there is some actual emissions, there is some benchmarking component here, and some carbon price that is paid in third country that is deducted, which eventually comes to your total or the importer's liability. So for in simple, benchmarks, these are values taken typically from top 10% of the manufacturers in Europe. So it is sort of a push for other manufacturers to say that this is the benchmark value 1.5. You have to reduce your emission to this level. Eventually, so that it reduces the whole emissions and the carbon emissions for those products, and the European Union as a whole also reduces. That is the benchmark. This benchmark also is not out yet. First, then there is the idea is whatever goods you bring in, you pay carbon tax to it. So if you bring in 2 tons or 200 tons of carbon dioxide is what you've imported through goods, then you will have to pay for 200 tons. This is the eventual final goal that will happen in 2034. But currently there will be a gradual reduction. So you will not pay for whole 200 in 2026. You will pay for a factor of 97.5, and then so on and so forth. I'll show you, there's a graph also in our next slide, that this factor will get reduced, eventually becoming zero. So that saying that whatever import you are getting, the total carbon emissions, you will be paying the tax on the whole value. Then there is a carbon price that is paid by third countries. So you'll think of that, okay, India also is coming up with their own um, emission trading system. China has their own emission trading system. So if we pay any cost to this system, does it get deducted? If these systems get recognized, so these carbon pricing schemes, if they get recognized by EU, then only will this happen. At the moment, they've not recognized any. So for us, our system, they've not recognized it. So this factor is gone. So in simple terms, we are whatever emissions you have in your product minus this benchmark into Cbam factor value. So these are free allocation. So it will get subtracted, and then there is a price of Cbam certificate is equals to your total certificates that you'll have. So I'll show you an example of this. And as I said, the allocation will go down. In 26, it will be 97.5. So how the simple calculation, so you can also do it at your end for your products, try to estimate, okay, where we lie. Now there's one problem. Again, these values are just I've taken for the example. So these are not any published values. So if, for instance, 2.6 is your actual embedded emissions, and you have a Cbam benchmark. So Cbam benchmark is what they will provide. So they have to provide two values. One is Cbam benchmark values, the other is Cbam default values. Cbam benchmark correlates to top 10 organizations, manufacturers that are there in Europe. So it is the benchmark. You have to reduce in order to reach that benchmark. So the free allowance will be 97.5% of 1.6. That gets subtracted from 2.6. Eventually, multiplication of the carbon, uh, the Cbam certificate, the Cbam price, that will come from EU ETS, and you will get your cost. So if you see roughly 85, this is the example. Now, what we do is we don't do anything. We keep it as business as usual. So we are not changing any benchmark. Nothing changes. With time, the Cbam factor will become 0 from 97.5. So think of the free lunches going away, and there is a factor attached to those free lunch allowances or free lunch. So once that completely goes away, your liability, the importer's liability, will increase. They have to pay more. When they pay more, there will be discussions around this value, the actual embedded emissions. Like, why is it high? What are you doing to reduce it? All those aspects will come into the picture. And then it is not an exaggeration if they come to you and also discuss in terms of discount or in terms of like sharing the cost of why, because your emission might be higher and there is a cost that they will have to pay. So even if we keep all factors same, then even then you can see the cost will double in next like 5 to 8 years. By 2034, when it becomes 0, it will get doubled. And this is when we are not, so this, and that's this factor, the Cbam benchmark, this will go down. So this benchmark is published for 5 years roughly. Each phase wise, it gets reduced. So this is also get reduced. The price, think the price has gone up. Now it is somewhere around 82 euros at the moment. It will go up because again there is demand supply, and because it's think of it as similar it works in the manner of like carbon stock market, and eventually it will go up. So your cost will increase. So very important factor for manufacturers is knowing the actual emissions and then also working towards reducing it. Very key important part. How we've seen for importers and the challenges that they have been facing, and this why their key challenge is important for us also is because we as manufacturer or as an exporter are somehow part of it. Now in terms of data accuracy, they have received those reports from manufacturers, but they are not sure because they don't have the primary data. So they are not sure whether the reports that have been submitted, whether they are correct or not, and whether they can make business decisions based on those values. So for them, it is becoming all the more important to know the accuracy of the reports, the accuracy of the data. So, and again, this they cannot wait until 2027. Think of like a very good example, although if we use an example of ITR, we all most likely at a later date fill the ITR for the previous year, even though for some the TDS might be deducted. So if we just remove that part, if TDS for instance is not deducted, eventually you will have to pay the liability whenever you're submitting the ITRs. When that happens, this is also similar. In 2027, the importer has to pay for 2026 the goods that were imported in 2026. The value that you as an organization will provide, or the importer will go with a default value. So when the liability kicks in and when they have to pay, there is no coming back from there because there's nothing they can do. So the time to do is now in 2026. So the monitoring, ensuring, okay, checking what the emissions are, how accurate my data. So there is a more the importers will ask you more and more about this information, and you will have to ensure that whatever goods you are um, sending specifically in 2026, you'll have to ensure that you have data records of it, you're doing the calculation properly. In terms of data collection, they face challenge importers because, again, not every supplier is big enough or has enough resources to provide that. There's not enough capacity building, so that is one of the challenges. So for them, at least, now they will have default value. That will be a cost, yes, because it's a higher value, default value. Then, but that is the price they might have to pay if the exporter is not able to provide the data and the report. And because of the communication now, it could be different languages, even though the supplier, uh, it's a difficult thing, but it is a challenge in the global market, the communication between the suppliers as well as the importers. And along with the accuracy in terms of the data part, it is also about the report completeness, whether the report, all the aspects of the report have been accounted and then reported in the European, the Cbam portal, so that nothing has missed out. Now, because at the moment there was no penalties, there it was on the May side that there may be penalties for any uh, wrongly reported ones, but when we go into definitive phase, when there is a liability, a cost associated with those values, then you can be rest assured that they will focus a lot more on ensuring the reports are complete, flagging the reports which are not ready or correct, and these things will happen. That's why the verification has come in. And also regarding the reporting deadlines, at the moment, if we think of the reporting that is to be submitted in 2027 September end, there is time deadline, but what will happen is, for the key challenges, they cannot wait. So you will have to get the accounting done. You'll have to get the verification done of your report and ensure you are submitting it by the reporting deadline for for them to be able to make to this reporting deadline, that is 30th September. For, again, for exporters, for manufacturers, our challenges that because it's strict, it's a new concept, it's a new regulation. Organizations are still uh, like trying to wrap their head around it and ensuring that, okay, where do we stand, what to do about this. Knowing that this regulation is not going away, organizations will have to step up slowly, gradually, and try to ensure that some part of it, and we'll see how we can create value. We have a wonderful chart prepared for you on that front. For competitive market, because this, either there is a European market which is relatively higher value market, but in order to meet that, you will have to ensure that you meet the regulatory requirements. If you don't, then you can definitely go to other markets, but then this has also led to increased competition in the other markets, specifically with the goods that come from China. They've been dumping it across the globe. They've increased there, and this shows this competition is going to keep on increasing. So what works for you, whether complying works for you or a different market works for you. Then precursor, especially with the simplification rule, the precursor part, earlier this has been a very challenging aspect, because a downstream would be then rely a lot on the upstream to provide that report, and if they cannot provide it, how will you provide it? So for bigger players, bigger manufacturers, especially working in the upstream processes and the upstream products, they think of them that they will be forced and to at least give a report in January, February. As soon as it finishes, do the report, get the verification, so that only then can you do your accounting and submit the reports from your end. So this communication probably that you've already established with your suppliers. There, this will be a continuous. Uh, you'll have to continuously build on it and ensure that even in definitive period you have access to that information as early as possible. That will definitely save you some time, and you will, and the cost that is to be incurred because of, be it through the human resources, the equipment, the technology that is required for monitoring all of this. uh, it's an added cost. That's one of the major key challenges that the manufacturers and importers are surely facing. So how can you create value? Where do you, as an organization, should target for, especially during this time when there is a transition from transitional phase to a definitive phase? The first would be, hopefully, organizations or the participants that are here, their organizations are reporting. So the obligation to report, account and report, is being carried out. So that's the obligation. That is what is expected to do, as you as an organization would be expected to do and to carry on in the next, the definitive phase as well. A smart thing and a much required thing for verification is to implement a monitoring system, have a monitoring methodology in place in line with whatever you are accounting and reporting. So take this period that is to come, start working on those documents, ensuring that you are already recording, you have those data records, your monitoring plan is all set, and you are doing the accounting and reporting in line with it. These two things is what you should be focusing on. Organizations who have done this, or one, and for organizations who will one reach this point, uh, they will be able to at least communicate to their importers that this is the value that we have at the moment for 2025, for instance, or because this will give them a bit of assurance that whatever value you are providing, they can estimate their liability basis out of it. So they will come and ask. We've had a lot of requests from the supplier, from manufacturers, communicating that yes, our supplier is asking for this information. With regards to regulation, you will have to submit a verified report in 2027. That is there. But apart from the regulation, your importer will most likely, for any business strategy you make, they will need to know what their upside or downside is with regards to the material that they are purchasing from you. So you should have that information. If you don't have that information ready with you, they'll have to resort to using default value, which then again would be at a higher level. But that we can say, because at a overall higher level is what they are targeting. But how high it is from your product, you can only know once you've done your own calculation. And for organizations who have done, who've been doing accounting reporting and who've been monitoring also, even though their documentation might not be there, they can also go towards going for a gap assessment, or just checking whether the system that they have in place is in line with the requirements of the CBAM guidelines. So be it gap assessment or pre-verification sort of thing, just to check. So that what will happen is, you'll get from this thing, you'll get out the findings, you will get out where you are lacking, be it in terms of accounting reporting. So then you will be able to work on those points. You will have 2026 to work on those points, try to reduce it, try to make any changes, so that when verification will happen, then in 2027 you are prepared. And and this is also gives the adds a little bit of assurance, as there is no verification in 2026. Whatever organization certificate, all these things are there, it's just the organization is doing it. It is in that manner, not in terms of regulatory requirement manner. So but doing a gap assessment does give your importer also certain assurance that okay, they've got whatever they are doing, accounting and reporting, they've also tried to get gap assessment. So from intent wise, you are already on board with your importer, and also you'll have time to, for any points that needs to be addressed, you'll have enough time, sufficient time. And once you've done that, you have everything ready. You'll also have your hotspots, your major contributing factors. Then you can work towards reducing those emissions, and eventually, now if I hope, as you've seen the formula and the cost implication, reducing the actual emissions will result in cost saving for your importer. This is a big advantage. This is a very big advantage when you're going into negotiations, especially with the purchasing and export part. This will definitely help you. And how we at SGS can support you with these services, and through this with our services, is we can provide you pre-verification or gap assessment, uh, thereby in this definitive period highlighting whatever shortcomings are there in your system, in your accounting and reporting, so that you as an organization can work on it and be better prepared for the verification period. And also you will be able to communicate more confidently the values that you've calculated to your importer. Another service through which we can support you is through training, which is more of preparing the teams, because see, think of, this is going to be an annual thing. Yes, you can definitely, and it is, the data monitoring aspect is very important. You cannot outsource data monitoring to someone else. You could outsource creating a report to someone else, but eventually you would need your team to be capable enough to carry out these activities and ensure that when the verification happens, all the aspects have been covered. So training is one which we can support through, and once the accreditation is, the guidelines are out and we'll get the accreditation, we'll be able to carry out the verification also. Why SGS, a bit about that is, especially with respect to the EU ETS, is what we would like to highlight. We EU ETS, the emission trading system, has been there. Cbam all links with it a lot. We've been an accredited verifier since 2006 in all Cbam sectors. Globally, the team are available. The local support is there, and yes, so that's all about SGS. And that also brings us to the final slide. And thank you for hearing me out. We can quickly move to the questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the insightful presentation, sir. We will now open the floor for question and answer session. And yes, participants can ask any question. Please raise the hands and we will allow you one by one to ask the questions.
Oh, and also you can put the questions in the chat as well, so we can take a look at them. Yes, Mr. Jagesh.
Hello,
So,
sir.
Mr.
Am I audible?
Chat, I
Yes,
cannot
sir.
able to
Yes.
put anything in the chat.
Yes, sir. You can.
Oh, okay, sir.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for for clarifying so many things. Sir, we are manufacturing steel products, and I believe what I understood from the presentation is that probably we will have to use the upstream emission data, and probably will be excluded from the the downstream data reporting. But as you said that whether we are actually or not, the CN of our product is still not clear. I mean, they have not given the list which products are exempted from that. So that is one thing. And second, we don't know what are the default values as of now for various CNs.
Mm.
So in that case, as a small manufacturer exporter, what are the things that we can do so that by the time the next quarter arrives and we have more data, so we are ready kind of, to
Mhm.
be on board. So what are the few things, maybe four or five things that we should start with at this point of time?
Okay. So first thing, what when I covered that top point was the downstream processes are excluded, not the downstream products. What it means is, think of it as, I like to use this example is A plus B equals to C. U as a downstream process is B, RB. So A emissions will be there, but B component you're not adding. So the downstream process are excluded. It is not known which downstream processes emission will be excluded. So you are only excluding the B component, the A component stays. More information you will get probably in a couple of months, wherein you will be know what communication you have to do when you're taking that value from the supplier and passing it on, and who has to do the reporting, whether it will be you or it will be your supplier. They'll also be doing it at their end. How you can still prepare in this dynamic situation is uh, establish a monitoring system wherein you have records of how much quantity you are purchasing from each supplier, right? And also ensuring, and you can work on collecting CBAM reports from those suppliers already. So what you'll do is uh, they'll provide you that information and you will keep a record of it. Because if precursors for downstream processes and the downstream goods, the major contributing factors are precursors. So you will at least have some records already. So these are the two things that you can already start working on. That is proper good monitoring of whatever imports, or sorry, whatever the material that you are coming purchasing from the supplier, that record how it is translating to the production and which is getting exported. The whole value chain record in terms of materials is what you should focus on. And also you should definitely ask for CBAM reports from them, keep records. So because whenever this will happen, you will still might require their CBAM reports, and it will be then that you will require their verified CBAM reports for in order to share for further. Okay, so next question. Yes. I am not able to see any raised hands, so if there are any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, so we use a component of stainless steel in a plastic finish. Please let us know if for this product also needs CBAM. Mr. Ramesh, for CBAM, if you there's a whole list of specific HSN or CN codes, common nomenclature codes, that are provided by the European Commission. So if your product falls falls under that CN code, then CBAM is applicable. So I hope you can check it, and that should clear the point, because everything is related to the CN code. Merchant exporting, dealing in agri products, say for example vegetable, fruits, tea, where I buy from supplies from Indian export, is CBAM restricted. At this level, sir, CBAM is only applicable um, on 6 sectors: iron, steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. So at the moment, no. Once, probably down the line in years, if because they have the plan of including more sectors, then there will be guidelines as per each sector, like they already have. So for each sector, even today, they have specified what to account, how to account, what to report, all of these things. So when more sectors and more products would be included, those guidelines would definitely be also shared. Mr. Umang, same with for you as well. Please check for copper. I'm not so sure because it's iron steel, so I don't think so. But still, please do check with the CN codes which CN code you are which you are using to export. So the HSN code is also similar. at least the initial digits. So you can use that code from, and you'll get it from your marketing team or sales team. So Guru Prasad says, sure. Guru Prasad ji, we'll definitely discuss on that and how we can support you on. So for typically for buying carbon credits, SGS works in the space of, Bhavish can add more on this if he's, I think so, on this. And we work primarily in the space of validation and verification of for carbon credits. That is, as a project developer, you've implemented a project which is saving and which is generating carbon credits. Then there is so once you've done the accounting, basically, we validate and then submit it to the program, be it Vera or so, and then they eventually provide you the carbon credits. For more information, I will definitely connect you with our team, which takes care of this. So Sumi says, how much cost will the importer in Europe pay? Is there any working amount? See, again, the importer will pay the cost, because as we saw, there are 2-3 factors which go into this estimation. One is the benchmark value, and the other is the Cbam, the actual emissions value that your product will have. Even if you consider the EU ETS, the Cbam certificate pricing to be at a constant level or a similar level as to what it is now, you could still do it, but you would still need these 2 factors, benchmark and the actual emissions. The actual emissions you might know if you're doing the accounting. The benchmark is not yet out. This will be out because it will be in line with EU ETS phase 5 that will come next year. So only after that the benchmark value will be out for the Cbam, and then you will be able to estimate. But as you saw that, and if you don't use the actual, you'll use default will most likely be higher than what your actual is, and then eventually more cost. We are into fabricated components. This is Germany and also exporting to Germany, so for railway components. Again, sir, if you could share, anyone who wishes to share, they can share, get in touch with us. We'll check with whether your product is there. Otherwise, we'll also try to put in some information and documents that you can refer to. If your CN code is there, you can definitely, then Cbam is applicable to you. Any inputs on reports which we have submitted? Those reports that you submitted as an organization, those have been with the Cbam in the Cbam portal. Those were part of the transition period. The European Commission might check on it, and if they have any discrepancy, they'll come back. Then again, during the transitional period, towards the end of it, they also came out with a call from importers and other stakeholders to know about their feedback. So the whatever experience the European Commission has also gone through during this transitional period, and the feedback that has been recently shared, they'll be coming out with some more documents in the coming months. And if there are any changes that are required, that will also happen then. And okay, then I think so. Hot dip galvanized steel also needed any test or certification for grease? I think so, yes. Hot dip galvanized steel. If you can get the HSN code, most likely it is there applicable. So it's not a test. So for those who wonder whether Cbam is a test or not, what you're doing in CBAM is you're calculating what the embedded emissions are there in the product, or you can think of like what is the easiest way. I do still want to use it, but the carbon footprint, you can put it that way. But because it is a different regulation, you have to calculate it differently. But whatever the embedded emissions, so there is a specific value, for instance 5, 6, 7 tons of CO2 emission per product. So it is always based on calculations that you carry out based on the production data. So it's not a test. And for certification, there's no certification yet. There's just reporting of the accounted values, accounting and reporting values. And certification, you'll get a verification certificate once when you get verified and your product get verified under this regulation. So Anita, if for instance machines, like you said, machines typically are at the moment CN code. I'm not sure whether it is, but for instance, the CN code is under CBAM and you are exporting 30 tons. The importer eventually uh, is importing 60 tons, like you mentioned. So the importer will have to report. The first thing is CBAM reporting. So they'll have to submit the CBAM report for the whole 70 tons, which includes your 30 ton as well. Regarding cost part, again, this regulation is only for importer. The European Commission or the bodies there, they do not force, or there is no regulation which says that you should pay, you as a exporter should pay that cost. There's no obligation, regulatory obligation. So whatever obligation might happen would be between you and your importer and the contracts that you have in place. There's no regulatory obligation for you to pay that amount. But then there is supplier and customer, the importer contracts, as per which whatever is there, you'll have to take care of it. So doing CBAM reporting on if we have to do the verification, whom should we contact? So as I said, currently, Jolly, there's no verification, but if you're already doing CBAM reporting, you can check with um, us as well for gap assessment or pre-verification, wherein we can cross-check your system as well as your accounting and reporting against the requirement of the CBAM, how it's been calculated, whether you are filling the template correctly, whether the data that you've used has been captured completely or not, and we should be able to give you findings and points that you could work on. And in 2027, we'll be able to also support you with the verification, because it is in 2027 is when the verification will be required. Can exporters compensate through certificates? Exporters can compensate through the certificates will be purchased by the CBAM declarant. So it's not like anyone will be able to buy it. The importer, so very one important factor is importers, because this is an exporter forum, so we stuck mainly to it. But for importers, there is a concept of authorized CBAM declarant. So either the importer can be an authorized CBAM declarant, or they can assign someone on their behalf, and they will have to register. And once they've registered and they've got they've become an authorized CBAM declarant, then they'll be able to bring their goods into Europe. Otherwise, they'll face challenges. So if you have certain close importers, you should communicate it to them. Now, the liability of CBAM certificates and the option to buy the CBAM certificate will lie with the importer or will lie with the Cbam declarant. So exporters won't can we won't be able to compensate through certificates. We need to submit fourth quarter of report of 2025 or only annual report need to submit. See, this is a very the importer will come to you as per the regulation. If we speak, the exporter or the installation operator should only be communicating based on annual production data, a single value, that which would be like, for instance, 2 tons of carbon dioxide per metric ton of product. That's the value I communicate, which this analysis will be based on, for instance, annual data. The importer bases on the quantity that they are importing for that particular quarter, and the quarter which went by, for instance, Q3. So they imported 150 tons. So they'll just multiply 150 into 300 tons of CO2 is what they imported, and what they will be communicating to the European Commission in the Cbam portal. Now, but the things are, the importer will still ask you. So you would, because it's the customer's request, then more or less you'll have to submit the fourth quarter report to them of 2025, for which for the importer at least the deadline is 31st of January 2026. What is the disadvantage of going for default value? 2025 reporting is mandatory. Yes, so 2025 reporting is mandatory, correct? Because it is under the transitional period. 2026 data will get reported in 2027, and that is also mandatory. What is the disadvantage of going for default value? Default values will, for instance, for at least because it is not yet out, the discussions that have been around it will represent, for instance, something like the worst 10% of certain geography. So if you are a product manufacturer, think of it in terms of what organization could be, for instance, the worst 10% in terms of emissions, and those type of values is what we would be looking at for the default values. So that is one of the major disadvantages if you go for that, because it will most definitely increase the liability of the importer. Sure, we'll definitely share the contacts. I guess all questions in the chat have also been addressed. So if there are, and we've also reached towards the end of our session. If there are any other questions, please let us know. Otherwise, Meenu ma'am, you'll have to weigh in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your insightful presentation, sir. And I invite Mr. Pranav Nagi, Manager, Carbon Service, SGS India Private Limited, for vote of thanks.
So much. So thank you all for joining today's session on Cbam Omnibus and beyond, preparing for the definitive period. I really hope this session was useful and to you, and really truly appreciate your time, engagement, and thoughtful questions. Very heartfelt thanks to Dr. Ajay sir, Sunil sir, and Anisha ma'am from FIO for their valuable support and collaboration in making this webinar possible. And we really look forward to any questions, anything, any support that we can provide as an organization in the Cbam journey to you all. Thank you for having us, and thank you for your time. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, sir.